Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Intermountain West Drought Briefing. I am Gretel Fallingstad, and I am the Intermountain West Regional Drought Early Warning System Coordinator, as well as the National Integrated Drought Information System, or NIDIS, as well as the National Drought Planning Program Manager. I'm excited for you all to attend our presentation today. We will be doing these monthly drought briefings in partnership with all 5 states in the Intermountain West region, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, and Wyoming, as well as the Drought Learning Network, which is a partnership between NIDIS, the National Drought Mitigation Center, and USDA's Southwest Climate Hub. The DLN is meant to connect climate service providers with resource managers and resource managers with one another to increase landscape and community resilience in current and future drought. We begin this briefing by respectfully acknowledging the land we are joining you from today, the ancestral land of Indigenous peoples. As we are in different parts of the country, this will be different for each of us. The land where I am speaking from is the traditional lands of the Tewa people, the Oge, Poga, Owinge, the White Shell, Water Place, or Santa Fe, New Mexico. Surrounding our community are lands of Pueblo, Apache, and Navajo communities, whose people continue to maintain vital connections to this place. I believe it is important to provide this acknowledgement because the narratives of this land and region are often told without acknowledging this history. So thank you for your attention and your respect. I want to take a moment to thank our presenters in today's webinar. We have Dr. Emily Elias. She is the director of the USDA Southwest Climate Hub. She has worked for more than 3 decades at the interface of water scarcity, water quality, agricultural production, and natural resources with the goal of supporting sustainable landscapes and communities. Emily leads the Southwest Climate Hub team and is engaged in research and science synthesis, tool development to support climate-informed decision-making, and convening scientists and shareholders to find solutions to climate-related challenges. We also are joined by Curtis Rigonti. He is a climatologist with the National Drought Mitigation Center at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and is one of the U.S. Drought Monitor authors. Aside from this duty, Curtis has also worked on research and research to operations products at NDMC, including drought and climate trends work in the Drought Risk Atlas and a recent research project on drought and snow trends in the Northeast United States, implementation of standardized streamflow indices for the Drought Risk Atlas, and climatological precipitation probabilities in support of grasscasts. Curtis will be presenting our current climate conditions for the Intermountain West and outlook, and Emily will be presenting on the National Climate Assessment 5th report and the Atlas tool. Following these presentations, we will take questions from the audience, so please put your questions into the chat function of GoToWebinar. I would like to kick off this webinar with highlighting an expanded NIDIS drought.gov tool for visualizing historic drought conditions at the county and state scales. This allows users to see the historical drought data as a time series graph. The QR code on this slide will take you there. Next, I wanted to highlight that NIDIS will be releasing the first snow drought update for water year 24 tomorrow. As you can see from these maps that highlight the Intermountain West, many snow tell stations in the southern portion of the region are about 50% or lower than the 1991 to 2020 median precipitation. And the SWE map on the right shows similar standing. This west-wide snow drought update will provide you a full picture of the snow to date as we move into the winter months. And in case you're not aware of the release of the 5th National Climate Assessment, it was released on November 15th. We are so lucky to have Emily Elias with us today to discuss the report and the Atlas tool. And with that, I will turn this webinar over to Curtis for our climate conditions and outlook.
Great. Thank you, Gretel. I think in order for me to share my screen, you'll need to give me permission to do that, which looks like you just did. Excellent.
Thank you.
All right, we'll go ahead and get started. So in this presentation, I'm going to go back and forth a little bit between sharing presentation slides, and then we're going to go through some current conditions outlooks and look at some of the current conditions in ArcMap, so you guys can see how this usually looks for me when I am doing the U.S. Drought Monitor, which I'll be doing the next couple weeks. The current author, Dave Simmerl from the Desert Research Institute, he's doing it right now. So we'll go ahead and get started. Just a quick overview of what's going on. So this briefing is covering the states of Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, and Wyoming. And so widespread parts of these states, especially Arizona and New Mexico, they're seeing pretty widespread drought conditions that have come back in right now, both in the short and long term. The most severe conditions are mostly in southern and especially southwest, south central Colorado, into New Mexico, into the eastern parts of Arizona, which didn't receive as much moisture from, it was a tropical cyclone, I'm forgetting the name of it now, but earlier on during, I believe, August, and I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the name of it. Yeah, so looking at just how have conditions changed in the region in the last week. So we've seen a little bit of improvement from Dave's last map in New Mexico, but then some degradation in conditions in parts of eastern Colorado based on some short-term precipitation deficits we're going to look at, as well as further degradation in southern Colorado and in parts of southern and southwest Wyoming. So then just a more regional look at the map again. So these statistics you can see on the right here, these are strictly speaking for the West region as a whole. We didn't have a breakdown specifically just for the Intermountain West states on our webpage, but if you want to look at these statistics, this just kind of gives you another look at what the current situation looks like out west. I failed to mention, if anyone here is not familiar with the U.S. Drought Monitor, what this map is showing, it's a weekly product that is a combined effort between the National Drought Mitigation Center here at the University of Nebraska and NOAA meteorologists and USDA meteorologists and a meteorologist at the Desert Research Institute, where we're trying to show drought conditions basically through different parts of the water cycle, through different lenses, on both a short and long-term time scale, expressed as percentiles relative to historical conditions from different types of data sets that represent the whole water cycle. So incoming precipitation, models for water loss due to evapotranspiration, soil moisture models, stream flow measurements, snow water equivalency during the cold season, really all of that we're taking into account. Go ahead and advance the slide here. So as Gretel was showing earlier, I think she had a map up of would have been, I think, water year-to-date precipitation amounts in parts of the Intermountain West. So what we're looking at right here is relatively similar. We're seeing a snow water equivalent, so basically the liquid water or weight of snowfall in different measuring sites here. I want to draw your attention just to the color scale here. What we're looking at is percentiles compared to the period of record for all of these different sites. So really we kind of see a mixed bag in parts of Arizona and Utah here, where we have a lot of stations that are kind of near your median value in terms of snowpack that we'd usually see by early December. But we do see some stations that are significantly below that and a few that are significantly above that level, especially here in northern Utah. So we move over into Colorado and northern New Mexico, much of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, and going into the San Juan Mountains here in Colorado and northern New Mexico. We're primarily seeing right now below normal snowpack for this time of year. Again, we're somewhat early in the cold season still, so there could be time for this snowpack to balloon. But right now, that's kind of what we're looking at. Central Colorado is doing a little bit better in that regard. But then as we move into northern Colorado, and especially some of the mountain ranges in Wyoming, we're again seeing below normal snowpack, especially here in the Wind River range, moving over into parts of the Wyoming range, into the Bighorns, and especially into the Snowy range here. We're really seeing below normal snowpack in these areas, and even up around Yellowstone Park and the Tetons. So across the West, again, there are some areas that are doing okay, especially into parts of Utah and Arizona in terms of snowpack, but especially as you move into parts of southern Colorado, northern New Mexico, and then into many of the ranges in Wyoming, with some local variants, we are seeing primarily below normal snowpack for early December. So this is just a larger look at drought conditions across the West region over the last few years. So we really did, and this is kind of part of really the mega drought that we've seen across the West region over the last couple decades. We saw drought conditions really balloon again. And what we have here on the y-axis is percent coverage of our different drought severity levels. The warmer colors are by definition more unusually dry conditions. And so really we saw across the West pretty severe drought conditions from 2020 into 2023. But then with the relatively wet winter that a lot of the West saw last year, we did see improving conditions across much of the region. But then with a really slow monsoon this past year, we saw drought conditions start to ramp back up late summer and into the fall in some of the desert Southwest and Four Corners. So I'll be taking a closer look at that here. So this is a 13-week change map from the US Drought Monitor. So this is just showing the category changes from week to week. And so we're seeing a lot of 2-class degradations across most of Colorado and especially Arizona and New Mexico, again, highlighting regions that were pretty dry during our typical monsoon months. So this is colloquially, sometimes meteorologists will refer to a really slow year as a non-soon. So these are standardized precipitation index values for the period from July through September of this year. And so really what I want to draw your attention to is kind of western and southern portions of Colorado, and then especially kind of central eastern Arizona and much of New Mexico. So these red values here, what's on the color scale, you can think of SPI. It's a standardized index where you're comparing precipitation amounts in this period here, it's July through September, to all the July through September measurements for these individual weather stations across their periods of record. And then you express that as a standardized index, something akin to a z-score or a standard deviation. And so we're really seeing really anomalously low precipitation values for these typical monsoon months here, especially in New Mexico, Colorado, and Arizona, where a lot of areas were at least 1 standard deviation below normal. And we had a fair number of measurements that were 2 or even in isolated spots 3 standard deviations below normal. So this is a pretty rare event in terms of just how dry this year's monsoon was. So then if you look at temperature departures over the same amount of time, again, as you had a pretty strong ridge develop out west, a ridge of high pressure, we didn't see as much monsoonal moisture get into this area as we would normally. So without that cloud cover, we were also tending to see above normal temperatures as well, which can make drought conditions that are developing worse, because not only do you not have your incoming precipitation, but what little moisture there is then going to be more likely to be zapped from the ground because of the intense sunlight we see this time of year, which goes into late and then eventually sensible heating of the ground. So we're going to look at a little bit more data that goes into like the US Drought Monitor and our ARC map here. So I want to do a bit more focus now on some of the shorter term data here. So this is a water year SPI. This is just looking from today back through October 1st. This highlights some of the shorter term dryness that we're seeing across parts of the West, especially here in the snowy range in southern Wyoming and some of the mountains. Yeah, I believe, if I remember right, this is kind of the Wyoming range here to the southwest of the winds further to the northeast. And then some of the eastern Colorado plains are continuing to stay relatively dry. We had a new area of abnormal dryness move into here. But then even in the last couple months, we're seeing relatively below normal precipitation along the Front Range and kind of north central Colorado here, and continued dry conditions in the Sangre de Cristo and San Juan mountains of southern Colorado and northern New Mexico. Take a quick look at some of the other hydrological data that we tend to look at. This is a GRACE product looking at root zone soil moisture percentiles. So what this shows is pretty severely dry conditions in parts of southern Wyoming, northern Colorado, and then especially across the western and southern portions of Colorado. We are also seeing still relatively dry conditions in parts of eastern Colorado. This might be a bit of a holdover from a really long-term dry signal we see out here before the pretty wet spring we had, that combined with more recent dry conditions. So just for the sake of time, we're going to jump back into our presentation here because I want to go into the outlook a little bit more too. So this is just a quick look at reservoir levels here, again expressed as percentiles from a few days ago. In the San Juan Mountains and in parts of northern New Mexico, we are seeing some below normal reservoirs. Largely, Colorado is kind of a mixed bag in this regard. New Mexico has a lot of lower reservoirs, and then Utah, largely in terms of reservoir levels, is doing fairly well. But just because of the really long-term dry signal, we are still seeing obviously very low reservoir levels at Lake Mead and Lake Powell here along the Colorado River. So we're going to just do a quick briefing on what the current weather conditions look like across the region, and then look at some of the outlook here. So right now we have heavier precipitation moving through Oregon and Washington, just looking at a quick radar loop here. That's because we have an atmospheric river coming into this area as a trough in the jet stream digs towards the western United States. We are seeing drier conditions across most of the area we're focused in on right now. So this is just a look at what the jet stream pattern may look like over the next couple of days. So these series of troughs and storm systems should move through the western United States over the next few days and deposit some precipitation before the storm system moves off into the central US. The majority of this precipitation should be confined in northern areas of our outlook area. These are some outlooks from the National Weather Service's Weather Prediction Center, just looking at overall QPF quantitative precipitation forecasts. As you can see, parts of Oregon, Washington, Northern California should get a healthy dump of precipitation. Some of the mountains in northwest Wyoming may get a little bit, as well as some of the mountains in northern portions of Colorado and Utah. Southern portions of the region should stay drier through this. Quick look at snowfall probabilities. These are probabilities of at least 4 inches of snowfall accumulation. Again, the primary signal for heavier snowfall accumulation right now is up in northwestern parts of Wyoming. Going out to day 4, we do see some decent probabilities for snowfall across parts of Colorado, and then it dries out again as we go further into next week here. Some longer term outlooks from the National Weather Service's Climate Prediction Center. This is their 6 to 10 day outlook issued yesterday. I'm going to refresh the page here, but I don't believe this, this hasn't been updated today yet. That should be out in the next few hours. But from December 10th through 14th as of yesterday, we're looking at decent probabilities across the southern parts of the region for below normal precipitation for this time of year. And then an okay shot for near normal or above normal precipitation across parts of northern Wyoming. Moving out to the period spanning December 12th through 18th, don't see a strong signal for above or below normal precipitation across western portions of Arizona and Utah or across southeast New Mexico, but there is a decent signal for below normal precipitation in between these areas in Colorado and along the Four Corners border areas. Moving out to our monthly drought outlook issued a few days ago for areas that have ongoing drought conditions. Through the end of December, these are expected to persist based on forecasts made 5 days ago. And then looking through the end of meteorological winter, so through the end of February, we are seeing decent probabilities given El Nino conditions for improving drought conditions in much of the south central and southeast United States. And then maybe a little portion here of some of the long-term drought remaining in southern Nevada may go away. And a little portion here of western Arizona may see improving conditions, but by and large, the rest of our area here should see persistence of ongoing drought. So for the sake of time, I'll go ahead and cut my presentation off. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Curtis. Very informative. And next, we will hear from Emily Elias. Emily, I think you should be able to share your screen at this point.
Excellent. Thanks, Gretel. Thanks, Curtis. That was a great update. Can you see my screen?
Indeed, we
Yes.
can. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, great. So thank you so much for inviting me to talk about this. As Gretel mentioned, I'm Emily Elias. I'm the director of the USDA Southwest Climate Hub with headquarters in Las Cruces, New Mexico. We cover New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, and Utah, Hawaii, and the US affiliated Pacific Islands. But today, since we're talking about the National Climate Assessment, I'm going to be talking a little bit more about the entire region of the Southwest chapter, which includes California and Colorado. And so I'm going to give you a brief overview of the assessment and some of the new features as well. Okay, great. So the National Climate Assessment was mandated by Congress in the Global Change Research Act of 1990. And I think this is really important. It's to assist the nation and the world. So this is an assessment for everyone to help in understanding, assessing, predicting, and responding to climate change. It is overseen by a federal subcommittee, and that subcommittee is made up of members of 14 different agencies. So it's a big report, and it's overseen by a large group of people, but produced through the U.S. Global Change Research Program. And I was lucky to be selected as the coordinating lead author of the Southwest chapter of the Fifth National Climate Assessment. And what that means is that I was able to invite the chapter lead and the chapter authors and put together a team to develop the National Climate Assessment. So what was published, as Gretel mentioned, in the middle of November was the Fifth National Climate Assessment. The first one was published just past the turn of the century, and the most recent ones were published in 2 volumes, the Climate Science Special Report, and then the 4th National Climate Assessment. What's new about this assessment, one of the new things is that it's the first assessment that is online only, so you can just view it through the webpage. That's how you can see the National Climate Assessment. The priorities for this assessment are a little bit different too. Certainly wanting to advance the broad conversation around the impacts of climate change, make the assessment very accessible to a broad audience. As I mentioned earlier, that was an important piece of this. Also, there are elements of very creative communication, and you can see one of those over to the right. So we, with this National Climate Assessment, had the first ever public call for art submissions. There were over 800 submissions, and the one you see here was selected as one of the winners. It's by Tammy West, and it's called Keep It Together, and it does focus on the southern part of the country, and that's where this was done. And you can learn more about it in the online gallery. Climate change impacts people, and while we assess biophysical data, there's a really important connection that's made very clear in the Fifth National Climate Assessment, and of course to make sure it's usable and useful moving forward. So we just wanted to highlight for you the chapters of the National Climate Assessment. It is broken down by a few different pieces of information. The first 2 chapters, there's an overview, and that's also, there's an audio recording of that. The first 2 chapters after that, climate trends and Earth system processes, are the biophysical chapters. So that's really where a lot of the major changes, downscaled climate models, that sort of information would be in those first 2 chapters. Then there are the sectoral chapters that you can see listed here, along with 2 new sectoral chapters, economics and social systems and justice. These chapters are given 5,000 words each to explain and express the changes since the last National Climate Assessment in that particular sector. Then there are the regional chapters you can see listed here. So for this webinar purposes, it would be the Northern Great Plains and the Southwest would be those chapters you want to go to. an adaptation and mitigation chapter, and something new is some focus on boxes, looking at either compound extreme events, Western wildfires, the impacts of COVID-19 and how those interact with climate change, supply chains and blue carbon. And then a new appendix this year is one focused on indicators. So when you go online, these chapters, these 32 chapters would be what you could expect to find and take a deeper dive. Within each of those chapters, there is an introduction, there are key messages, and those really are the high-level things that the chapter authors wanted to express. Then the narrative supports those key messages. One of the stickiest pieces of the National Climate Assessments are the graphics and the figures. And I even still use some of the figures from the third National Climate Assessment because they were so good. And so those are also pieces of this. And then the traceable accounts is where you'll find the details about the literature and the background that supports the key messages and the narratives. And then finally, the references. For our chapter in the Southwest, there were 400 pieces of peer-reviewed literature cited. So these are the components of each chapter that you can find online. And I wanted to highlight this piece of artwork on the right. This focuses on the Southwest. It tries to show 11 different endangered species in the Southwest, and it was done by an 11th grader. So just want to highlight that there was really some amazing artwork that's part of this assessment. Now I'm going to get into a few of the key messages that apply to the Intermountain West. So I don't include the ones that were ocean and coastal messages here, but those are also there. So one was focused on drought and increasing aridity and how that threatens water resources. I won't read through the message since you can find that yourself online. The next one I wanted to highlight talks about challenges to food and fiber production in the Southwest. And there's some confidence statements and likelihood around those and all of the key messages. Another one that the authors chose to focus on is how climate change might impact human health and reshape demographics in the region in the Southwest. So that's one that you can look into more when you look at the Southwest chapter of the National Climate Assessment. And then the last one I wanted to highlight is changes in wildfire patterns and how those pose challenges for Southwest residents and ecosystems. And there's a lot of interesting and new research that's summarized there. And then I wanted to highlight 3 figures for you. This is the first figure that authors and technical contributors developed, looking at indicators and how they highlight important climate impacts and adaptation and mitigation efforts. And you can see there are some indicators about the amount and timing of precipitation, renewable energy, wildland fires. And this is really an all-encompassing figure that talks about a lot of the key messages that I just highlighted. This figure is showing the satellite images of Lake Mead over the last 22 years, and just really showing the water level declines and highlighting the water supply implications for people in the Southwest. And I thought that was important for a drought briefing. And then the last thing I wanted to highlight, the last figure I'm highlighting for the purposes of this briefing, is to show you how extreme heat events are expected to increase, and then how that affects our ability to perform outside work. And so you can see, the percent share of days in the summer with physical work capacity below 75%. Up at the top left, showing sort of the historic hours, and then how that might change by mid-century or the end of century with different climate scenarios. And so you can see there are areas where outdoor work capacities really will decline by the end of the century. I wanted to highlight some of the resources that are now available that you can go online and download easily. To go to NCA 2023.globalchange.gov, you can get the slides for each of the 32 chapters I showed you, along with the key messages and figures, chapter summaries. You can look at all of the art that I mentioned. As I think I mentioned, there were 800 submissions and 92 of those were selected to share. Also this time, Ada Limon, who is the 24th Poet Laureate, wrote a poem for the National Climate Assessment. That's also online. And I think really importantly, there is a glossary so that the terms that we're using related to climate change and adaptation and mitigation, some of the terms that are not as well known are defined within this glossary so that we're all speaking the same language and talking about the same thing. There are also 6 podcast episodes related to the National Climate Assessment. Those are available online. The audiobook recording of the overview. And there are many webinars coming up. For the Southwest, that'll be February 24th. But there's a list of the entire webinar series online. If you're interested in a particular sector or topic or region, you can find those there. And then the last thing I want to mention is the Atlas. So for the first time ever, the National Climate Assessment is providing an atlas, atlas.globalchange.gov. And this is an interactive online tool that allows anyone to explore different climate scenarios and variables to highlight local climate projections. So the beta version has been released. You can go there now and look at it. Additional features and information will be added over time. So this is just an image of the atlas on the right. It's a digital data viewer and developed as an extension of the Fifth National Climate Assessment. The variables that are available right now are temperature and precipitation at the county level, at the county scale for different time periods. And they were developed using the same methodologies, the downscaled data that was used in the National Climate Assessment. So that's the CMIP6 data. There are interactive features. These allow users to generate and download their own regional and local maps. I had a really good time playing with it before this presentation and looking at what's available right now. And users can select from a range of global warming levels, so degrees in warming, and time periods. So you can really select what you're looking at and what you want to assess. So this is the homepage of the Atlas right now. So you can develop climate maps within the Atlas. You can look at some of the climate stories. There's one right now based on urban heat. And then you can download and evaluate the climate data. So again, it's at atlas.globalchange.gov. And with that, I want to make sure I share with you my email address if you have any questions. Emily.elias@usda.gov. Please feel free to reach out. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge Dave White at Arizona State University, the chapter lead for our chapter, along with all of the other authors that are listed here who contributed on top of their typical workloads. They added this to their work for basically 3 years. So this was a lot to take on, and I'm really grateful to them for all of their work that went into this. So with that, I'll turn it back to Gretel.
Wow, thank you so much, Emily. What an amazing presentation on the National Climate Assessment and the Atlas tool. I'm excited to go jump in there myself. So next, we do have a few questions from the audience, and I will also alert you to, if you do have questions for any of our presenters, that you can put those in the quote unquote questions box. And the first one that we have is for you, Curtis, and it says, could you please give a top 3 issues affecting Colorado? Some of it got cut off, but it says it looks like the Southwest went into drought quickly, and it seems like it went so fast. And also, would you mind sharing your contact information?
Sure. Top top 3 issues, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of kind of ranking issues, but yeah, also not being from there, I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer this question. I might direct you to the Colorado Climate Center and some of their state climate office people too, but I would certainly say the drier start to snowpack accumulation is up there. I would say the slow monsoon in the southwest part of the state, the combined impacts of those things in southern Colorado is definitely would definitely be an issue. I guess probably distant third is probably the abnormal dryness that you're starting to see in the eastern part of the state that has been developing over the last couple months. Again, I would say that's lowest on the list, partly because of how wet of a spring and early summer that region had compared to normal, and just because this is usually a drier time of year for that area anyway. And yeah, my contact information, I can put my email address into the chat. I'm hoping this is the right chat window here. I'll go ahead and set that in. And then I'll put my desk phone here as well. So, yeah.
Thank you. One other question we have for you, Curtis, is given the prediction or current El Nino signal for this coming winter, and the AR that you just showed coming into the northwestern states, do you have any idea about the relationship between El Nino and anticipated precipitation for the long-term drought that you showed being less, and or a relationship between atmospheric rivers and El Nino? That is a very hard question. But I'll let you
my background is as a meteorologist, so at least the El Nino connections to atmospheric rivers and whatnot, I in theory should remember that better. From what I remember, usually when you have an El Nino year, you kind of end up with a split flow in the jet stream by and large, where your polar jet ends up a little bit further north, but your subtropical jet stream is fairly active. So that does usually lead to more storm systems and wetter storm systems across the southern tier of the United States. In terms of what exactly the next several months are going to look like, because in my position as a climatologist at NDMC, I don't do any forecasting. So I'd probably defer you to the Climate Prediction Center forecasts, which again, for the most part, showed just persistence of ongoing drought conditions, except for that small part of Arizona in the southwest. We do see a more typical El Nino-like precipitation distribution in this south central and southeast United States, though, where again, that more active subtropical jet should deliver more hefty amounts of precipitation down there that should lead to some drought relief. Do also want to say, and so El Nino La Nina is one of the major contributors to general patterns that we see in North America in the winter. It is not the only one, though. There are other types of longer scale oscillations that we see in the oceans that can also affect weather patterns, as well as things like the Madden-Julian oscillation, or more recent research topic, things like what are called sudden stratospheric warmings that can basically help to displace the polar vortex and cause changes in longer term weather conditions and weather patterns in general in North America. So so does play an effect on this. There are other things that meteorologists and climatologists who are making these forecasts are also going to be considering. It's just that I'm probably not the best person to give a really specific answer on the reasoning for what those long-term forecasts that I showed were.
Thank you. Yes, the NOAA Climate Prediction Center page shows those forecasts, and there is an ENSO page on NOAA as well. The next question is for you, Emily, and that is within the Atlas tool, when you were playing with it, what was the precipitation outlook for the southwestern region of the US?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. And so there are a variety of different futures that you can look at. So you can look at if the Earth warms different amounts and then what the impacts will be. So it depends on if you decide that the Earth will warm 2 degrees or 4 degrees, and then you can see at the county level different predictions for changes in precipitation. Generally, the predictions are, depending on the season and depending on the location, a lower precipitation. But again, there are seasonal implications to that. And so it depends on the scenario you choose and the county that you choose. But I encourage you to please go look at it and look at locations where you might live and work and where you're really interested in changes.
Excellent. So far, I don't see any other questions in the chat. And so I want to thank everyone for attending today. And we hope that you will join us again. Our next webinar will be on January 23rd, 2024. So please keep an eye out for that announcement. And we hope to see you again. And we wish everyone a happy holiday season. And this concludes our webinar. Thank you so much.